This is a bucket of mud with 2 pieces of carbon in it, and it costs about $12. There is no chemistry to mix, no metal that dissolves, and nothing inside it that gets used up in the way a battery does. It produces electricity because the bacteria, already living in that mud, are alive, eating, and breathing out electrons. Bury it, wire it, and it will keep producing for months without you touching it. It works at 3 in the morning, it works in January. It works under a foot of snow, which is more than any solar panel on Earth can say. And here's the honest part, stated up front, because almost nobody covering this will say it. The power is genuinely tiny, not modest, tiny. We are talking about milliwatts, and a phone charger delivers thousands of milliwatts. Anyone showing you a bucket of mud beside a house and implying you can run anything meaningful off it is either not measuring or is hoping you will not. But there is a category of jobs where a permanent trickle beats a large intermittent supply completely. And once you understand what that category is, this becomes one of the most genuinely useful things in this entire field. Let me start with what is actually happening in that bucket, because it is one of the strangest things in biology, and almost nobody is taught it. Every living thing has the same fundamental problem. To extract energy from food, an organism has to strip electrons off that food and then get rid of them, and it needs somewhere to put them. You and I use oxygen. Every breath you take is your body collecting electron receptacles, and the water you exhale is the end product of that transaction. Now go down into mud, a few inches below the surface of a pond or a marsh, and there is no oxygen at all. It has been consumed. Nothing can breathe down there in the way we understand breathing, and yet that mud is full of bacteria, thriving, breaking down organic matter constantly. So where are those electrons going? The answer, discovered properly only in recent decades, is that certain bacteria do something extraordinary. They push their waste electrons directly onto solid surfaces outside their own bodies. Iron minerals, rock, anything conductive they can reach. Scientists call them exoelectrogens, meaning outward electricity generators, and the best studied of them carry names worth knowing, Geobacter shewanella. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts identified that some of these organisms grow filaments that function as electrical wires, physically conducting current out of the cell to a distant surface, and those structures are now called microbial nanowires. Read that again, because it deserves a moment. There are organisms in the ground beneath your feet that have evolved wiring. So here is the machine, and it is almost absurdly simple. Put a conductive plate down in the oxygen-free mud, which becomes your anode. Put another conductive plate up at the surface, where it meets air and oxygen, which becomes your cathode. Connect them with a wire. The bacteria in the mud, doing exactly what they have always done, dump their electrons onto that buried plate. Those electrons cannot go anywhere else, so they travel up your wire through whatever you have connected, and arrive at the top plate, where they combine with oxygen and protons to make water. That flow through your wire is an electric current, and it is being generated by living organisms eating rotting matter in the dark, which is why this is genuinely different from every other cheap battery trick. In a lemon battery or an earth battery, the fuel is the metal, and the metal dissolves until it is gone. Here, the fuel is the organic matter in the mud, and the catalyst is a self-repairing, self-replicating colony of bacteria that maintains itself. Add food, and the colony keeps going. It is closer to a livestock arrangement than an appliance. So the obvious question is why almost nobody has heard of this, and the answer is not that it is new. It was discovered in 1911. A botanist named M.C. Potter, working at the University of Durham in England, ran experiments with cultures of bacteria and yeast, and demonstrated that microbial activity produced a measurable electrical current. He published his findings in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, which is about as mainstream as science gets, and the world essentially shrugged. 20 years later, in 1931, a researcher named Barnett Cohen took the idea further and stacked microbial cells in series, showing that the voltage added up the way it does in any battery chain. He reported a stack producing tens of volts, although the current remained tiny, which turned out to be the permanent theme of this entire technology. Then it went quiet for decades, until an organization with a very specific problem picked it up. NASA, in the 1960s, faced a question nobody else had to answer. On a long space mission, a crew produces organic waste continuously, and every kilogram launched is enormously expensive. So the agency funded research into whether human waste could be converted into electricity aboard a spacecraft. Closing the loop, instead of storing the problem, the physics worked. The power density did not, and it was set aside again, which is a sentence you will hear more than once in this story. The modern era began in the late 1990s. Until then, these cells needed added chemical mediators, meaning artificial compounds, to ferry electrons from the bacteria to the electrode, which made the whole thing expensive and impractical. Then, researchers established that certain bacteria could transfer electrons directly to a surface with no mediator at all, and suddenly the machine became a bucket of mud rather than a laboratory apparatus. Now the deployment, because this is where it stops being a curiosity, the one genuinely successful field application is the sediment microbial fuel cell, sometimes called a benthic cell, and the setting is the ocean floor. Consider the problem an oceanographer faces. You want a sensor sitting on the seabed measuring temperature, salinity, or current for years at a time. Batteries run down, and retrieving and replacing them requires a ship, a crew, and a great deal of money. Solar is obviously useless 100 meters underwater, but the seabed is thick organic sediment packed with exactly the bacteria we have been describing, with oxygenated water sitting directly above it. So researchers, including work supported by naval laboratories, buried an anode in that sediment, suspended a cathode in the water above, and powered marine instruments from the microbial activity of the seafloor itself. Not for a week, for years, continuously, without a single service visit. That is the honest, working, deployed version of this technology, and it tells you precisely what it is good for. And there is a commercial path, too, in wastewater treatment. Research groups, notably at Penn State, have spent years developing microbial fuel cells that treat wastewater while generating electricity from the organic load in it. Treating sewage is enormously energy-intensive, so a process that cleans water and produces power instead of consuming it is a genuinely valuable proposition, and it remains an active field. There is one more branch of this worth knowing about, and it is the strangest of the lot. A living plant, growing in soil, sends a substantial share of the sugars it makes through photosynthesis down into its roots, and a meaningful portion of that leaks out into the surrounding soil. That is not waste, it is a deliberate transaction, since the plant is feeding the bacterial community around its roots in exchange for nutrients those bacteria unlock, which means the soil around a living root is unusually rich in exactly the organic fuel a microbial fuel cell wants, and it is being resupplied continuously by sunlight. Researchers in the Netherlands pursued this commercially growing wetland plants in beds with electrodes buried among the roots. Generating electricity from the bacterial breakdown of root exudates without harming the plant at all. The plant keeps growing, the bacteria keep eating, and the current keeps flowing. The output is still small, and the same arithmetic applies. But conceptually, it is remarkable, since you have a system where sunlight drives photosynthesis. Photosynthesis feeds bacteria, and bacteria produce electricity, with the plant acting as a self-repairing solar collector that also happens to be alive. So why can you not buy a mud battery at a hardware store? The answer here is not paperwork, and it is not suppression. It is power density, and I would rather be straight with you than pretend otherwise. A solar panel the size of a dinner plate produces watts. A bucket of mud produces milliwatts. That is a difference of 1,000-fold, and no amount of clever engineering closes it, because the limit is biological. Bacteria metabolize at the speed bacteria metabolize, which means there is no consumer product to sell. No manufacturer can build a mud battery that competes with a $5 solar garden light on any measure a shopper cares about. So nobody builds one, so nobody markets one, so almost nobody has heard of it. The technology went where it belonged, which is the seabed and the sewage plant, and it never came to your garage because it has nothing to offer there. This channel exists for exactly this kind of straight answer. One honest method a week, and subscribing is how those keep arriving. Now the arithmetic, and this is the part that decides what you build. A sediment microbial fuel cell produces power on the order of tens of milliwatts per square meter of anode. A bucket-sized cell with an electrode roughly the size of a dinner plate is therefore working in the range of a few milliwatts at best, and often less. Set that against real loads. A phone charger delivers 5 to 10 watts, which is 5 to 10,000 milliwatts. An LED bulb is several watts. A refrigerator is over 100. So a single mud cell is somewhere between 1,000th and 1/10,000th of what it takes to charge a phone at normal speed. There is no arrangement of buckets in a back garden that changes that. Voltage tells the same story. A single cell produces somewhere around 3/10ths to 7/10ths of a volt open circuit against a theoretical ceiling of roughly 1.1 volts, and that voltage sags immediately under load. That is the honest number. And now let me show you why it still matters. There is an entire category of devices that need almost nothing forever, in places nobody wants to visit. A temperature sensor reporting once an hour, a soil moisture probe in a field, a water level monitor in a remote stream, a wildlife camera trigger, an environmental logger. These devices draw microwatts on average, spending almost all their time asleep, waking briefly to take a reading and send it. For that job, a source that produces 3 milliwatts continuously and never stops is worth more than a battery that produces plenty and dies in 18 months, because the cost of that device is not the power, it is the person who has to walk out and change the battery. That is exactly the calculation the marine researchers made, and it is the only calculation that makes this technology sensible. There is a second category worth naming, which is education, and it is not trivial. Commercial kits exist that package this exact experiment for classrooms, and they work precisely because the result is genuine rather than staged. A child assembles a jar of mud, waits 3 weeks, and then watches an LED blink, powered by organisms they cannot see, in dirt they collected themselves. That is a more convincing demonstration of microbiology than any diagram in a textbook. And if there are children in your house, it is worth building for that reason alone, regardless of what it powers. The technique that makes it work is worth understanding, because you cannot run anything directly off a trickle this small. You use the cell to slowly charge a capacitor. The trickle fills that store over minutes or hours, and when enough charge accumulates, a small circuit dumps it in a quick, useful burst, then starts filling again. That is how a device drawing microwatts on average can still flash an LED brightly, or fire off a radio transmission. Hobbyists use a simple circuit for this, often called a joule thief, which takes a very low voltage and boosts it to something usable in pulses. Purpose-built energy harvesting chips do the same job far more efficiently and cost a few dollars. Trickle in, store, burst out. That is the whole architecture, and it is the same architecture used in every serious low-power harvesting application on Earth. Now, let me show you how to build one. The container is anything non-conductive that holds mud and water. A 5-gallon bucket, a plastic storage tub, or a large glass jar all work and cost nothing to a few dollars. The mud is the actual machine, and where you get it matters more than anything else on this list. You want anaerobic sediment rich in organic matter, which means the black, sticky, faintly sulfurous mud from the bottom of a pond, a marsh, a ditch, or a slow stream. That smell is the signature of the anaerobic bacteria you are trying to recruit. Clean garden soil works poorly, and dry sandy soil barely works at all. The electrodes are your one real purchase. You want conductive, corrosion-resistant material with as much surface area as possible. And the standard choice is carbon in some form. Carbon felt or graphite felt is ideal and runs about $10 to $25 for enough to make several cells. Graphite plates work, plain stainless steel mesh works, though not as well, and ordinary steel will rust away and ruin the cell. Surface area is everything here. Since the reaction happens where the bacteria meet the electrode, a folded piece of carbon felt beats a smooth plate of the same footprint many times over. Assembly takes about 10 minutes. Put a layer of mud in the bottom, lay your anode flat on it with an insulated wire attached and running up out of the container. Cover it with several more inches of mud, packed down, which keeps oxygen away from it. Add pond water on top. Then float or suspend your cathode at the surface, half in water and half exposed to air, since it needs oxygen to complete the reaction. Run both wires out, connect a multimeter, and wait. That waiting is the part people get wrong. This is not a chemical battery that works the instant you assemble it. You are growing a biofilm, meaning a colony of bacteria has to establish itself across the surface of the anode, and that takes days to weeks. Output climbs steadily as the colony matures, and a cell that reads almost nothing on day 1 may be performing well by week 3. What is happening during those weeks is worth understanding. because it changes how you treat the thing. The mud already contains a mixed population of thousands of bacterial species, most of which have no interest in your electrode at all. But you have just introduced something none of them have encountered before, which is an unlimited electron receptacle. And for the exoelectrogens in that population, it is an enormous opportunity. So they colonize it. The organisms that can transfer electrons to a solid surface multiply preferentially on your anode, gradually crowding out the ones that cannot. And over the course of weeks, that plate becomes coated in a living film dominated by exactly the bacteria you want. You are not building a battery. You are running a selection process, and the electrode is the prize, which is why disturbing it sets you back so badly, and why the second cell you build in the same mud often starts faster than the first. It is also why patience is genuinely the main skill involved, since there is nothing you can add to hurry a colony that is already growing as fast as it can. To increase output, you stack cells the way you stack any battery. Wired in series, their voltages add, which is what you need, since a single cell cannot even reach the 1.5 volts of an AA. Wired in parallel, their currents add. Most practical builds do both, and this is precisely what Barnett Cohen demonstrated in 1931. One warning on stacking that catches almost everyone: you cannot simply wire several cells in series if they share the same body of mud and water, because the liquid itself conducts and the cells short through it, canceling the gain you were trying to make. Each cell in a series chain needs to be electrically isolated from the others, meaning separate containers with separate mud connected only by wire. That is why serious builds look like a row of jars rather than one large tub with several electrodes in it. And it is the single most common reason a stacked setup reads no better than a single cell. For isolated cells in series will get you comfortably past 2 volts, which is enough for a boost converter to work with, and that is usually the practical target. Total build cost lands between $12 and $40, depending on your electrodes, and a boost circuit adds a few dollars more. Now the troubleshooting, because most first cells underperform, and the causes are nearly always the same for things. If you read almost nothing after 3 weeks, check your mud first. Clean topsoil, potting compost, and dry sandy soil all disappoint, since they lack both the organic matter and the established anaerobic population. Go and get proper black pond sediment and accept that it will smell. If your voltage is reasonable but collapses the moment you connect anything, that is normal, and it is telling you the internal resistance is high. The fix is more electrode surface area and closer spacing between anode and cathode. Since every centimeter of mud between them is resistance, the current has to fight through. If your output rose and then fell away over a month, your bacteria have eaten the icily available organic matter near the electrode. Feed the cell by mixing in fresh sediment or organic material and expect output to recover over the following weeks. And if it stopped abruptly, check whether the water level dropped and let air reach the buried anode. Oxygen is the one thing that ends the process immediately, since the bacteria will always take the easier path when it is offered. Fix those 4 and almost every cell performs. Now the section the sponsored videos skip because this has real limits, and an honest account owes them the same volume as the praise. The first is the output, which I have already given you and will not soften. Milliwatts, sensors, and LEDs, not appliances. The second is time, weeks to reach full output, and if you disturb the anode or let oxygen reach it, the colony suffers and you start over. The third is fuel. Since the bacteria are consuming the organic matter in that mud and it does deplete, output falls over months and the cell needs feeding, meaning fresh sediment or added organic material, which is why this behaves more like keeping livestock than owning a battery. The fourth is temperature. Bacterial metabolism slows sharply in cold, so a cell that performs well in August produces considerably less in February. And outdoor cells in cold climates go nearly dormant. The fifth is that oxygen must be kept away from the anode. If your mud layer is too thin, or the water dries out and air reaches the buried electrode, the whole mechanism stops, because the bacteria will happily use oxygen instead of your wire the moment it becomes available. And the sixth is that it will never compete with solar on cost per watt in any climate at any scale. If your goal is power, buy a panel. If your goal is a source that runs in permanent darkness, underwater, or under snow, with no maintenance for years, This is one of the very few options that exists at all. The safety picture is the simplest in this entire field. There is no shock risk whatsoever, since we are dealing with a fraction of a volt. There is no fire risk, no pressure, and no toxic chemistry. The genuine cautions are biological. Pond and ditch sediment contains bacteria that are perfectly happy in mud and not welcome in a cut on your hand. So wear gloves, wash thoroughly afterward, and keep the container away from food preparation areas and out of reach of small children and pets. Do not seal the container airtight, since the cathode needs air and anaerobic decomposition can produce gas. Never drink the water, obviously, and do not aerosolize it by spraying or vigorous stirring indoors, and keep it outdoors or in a well-ventilated space, because a bucket of anaerobic mud has a distinct smell that most households will not tolerate in a kitchen. The ledger for the whole story then: a container, nothing to $5. Carbon or graphite felt electrodes, $10 to $25, enough for several cells. Wire and connectors, a few dollars. Mud, free, from the nearest pond with permission. A boost converter or energy harvesting chip if you want usable output, $5 to $15. Total, $12 to $40 for a device that produces electricity from living organisms for months on end without being touched. Here's the thing worth keeping from all of it. This was demonstrated in 1911, published in one of the most prestigious journals in science, and then largely ignored for 80 years. Not because it failed, but because the power was too small to interest anyone in an age of coal and oil. NASA looked at it and set it aside. Laboratories rediscovered it, and the place it finally found a home was the floor of the ocean, powering instruments in the one environment where no other source works at all. There is something worth sitting with in that. The ground beneath your feet is, right now, running a slow electrical process that has been happening for billions of years, entirely without our involvement. Bacteria have been moving electrons onto mineral surfaces since long before there were plants, and we have known about it for over a century. It just never produced enough to build an industry around, and so it stayed where it was. And there is a deeper version of that thought worth a moment. This process is not a curiosity that bacteria happen to perform. It is one of the oldest metabolisms on the planet, running in sediments and rock and ocean floor for billions of years. And on a global scale, it moves a staggering quantity of electrons through the crust every day. Geologists studying iron and manganese deposits now understand that a great many mineral formations were shaped by exactly this activity, meaning the rock itself is partly a record of bacteria breathing onto it. So the bucket in your yard is not a novelty. It is a very small tap on a process that has been running continuously since long before anything walked on land. And the only genuinely modern part of it is the wire. Everything this channel has gathered on making power the honest way, the trickle sources, the storage, the real numbers, and the real limits, lives in one place, linked right below. And the comments are where this one gets interesting. Has anyone actually built one of these and put a meter on it? Tell me what you read and what mud you used, because the difference between good pond sediment and clean garden soil is enormous, and almost nobody publishes their numbers. As for the other source that produces power in complete darkness in winter, using nothing but the temperature difference between two sides of a metal plate that is on screen right now, different physics, same trickle. Till next time.